Sometimes you need a really wide lens on the cheap. Does the Samyang 12mm f2.0 fit that bill? Well, let's find out. This video is brought to you by the Brave browser. Brave is an open source project built from the ground up around privacy and performance. Plus, you can use Brave payments to support your favorite creators, and only the creators you want to support. Check the description for a link with more information. So before we get into this, I want to quickly clarify that I'm specifically looking at the Micro Four Thirds version of this lens. Also, as far as I can tell, this lens is basically identical to Rokinon's 12mm lens, so if you're confused about the differences, it seems they're exactly the same lens under different brands. To start off with, the lens is a mostly metal construction, including the mount, which is definitely a good thing. Overall, the lens is very similar in size to other Micro Four Thirds primes, with the exception of the filter thread, which is rather wide. The lens is also fairly hefty thanks to metal construction, but it's still reasonable for a Micro Four Thirds lens. The lens has a manual aperture ring which goes from f2.0 to f22, as well as a manual focus ring. Both are quite nice and smooth, although the focus ring is a bit stiff in my opinion. The aperture is also stepped if that's something that bothers you. That brings us to one of the first major points of this lens. It has no camera integration, no autofocus, and no camera-controlled aperture. Having to set the aperture on the lens isn't too annoying. I actually like the physical control, especially useful for lens whacking, but it means you can't use the camera in shutter priority mode. That said, the really big pain is the lack of autofocus. Being able to nail focus instantly at the click of a button is incredibly handy, and I forget how much I utilize it when it isn't there on this lens. Even when using manual focus on most lenses, my Lumix G7 has integration that automatically zooms in on an area of the screen when you move the focus ring to help you nail the focus, but not on this lens because, again, it has no electronics. With that negative out of the way, let's talk about some more positives, like the image quality. The lens is pretty much tack sharp. I primarily use this lens for time lapses, and I can easily see when looking at the raw images that there aren't any signs of softness, chromatic aberration, or vignetting, even wide open on the lens, which is great on such a wide lens. The lens has a minimum focusing distance of 20 centimeters, which makes for some nice close-ups. Speaking of close-ups, the lens has fairly shallow depth of field at f2.0. It's not great for close-ups like a longer portrait lens is, but it can do the job in a pinch. The lens also has some nice and soft bokeh, but again, you won't see that much since it's such a wide lens. Going back to another negative, the size of the filter thread. For whatever reason, the end of the lens is super wide. The glass isn't taking up that space, so I genuinely have no idea why the lens gets so wide at the front. What that means is that I can't use the 52mm filters I use on most of my lenses, and instead I had to buy a 72mm filter, which is much more expensive because of the larger size. That isn't a huge complaint, but if you use filters on your lenses, you will probably need a new set to fit on this lens. So I guess that brings us to conclusion time. Personally, I find myself reaching for this lens less and less. My Olympus 12-40mm is just as wide as this lens, has better image quality and more features like autofocus and electronic aperture. Of course, the 12-40mm costs 2 to 3 times as much as this lens does. If you're in search of a wide prime lens on a budget, this lens is pretty much your best bet, if only because there aren't really any other lenses this wide for Micro Four Thirds, ignoring fisheye lenses at the $200 price point. As long as you're fine with the totally manual focus and aperture, it really is a neat and inexpensive lens. Anyway, that's it for this video. If you liked this video, if it helped you to decide whether or not you want to pick up a Samyang 12mm, hit that like button. If not, feel free to hit the dislike button. If you have any questions or comments about this lens or anything else, feel free to leave those down in the comment section down below. And if you want to see more videos like this, please hit that subscribe button.